Alright, so in this video we are going to discuss Sutra 1.32. In the previous video we discussed Sutra 1.31, which involved the different distractions of the mind that accompany the obstacles of the mind. Now, we have learned how to remove the obstacles by the chanting and the contemplation of the meaning of Om, and also the distractions will be removed by that same manner as well, but here we're going to learn of a different way in which the distractions are removed. So, if you haven't already subscribed, please feel free to do so by hitting the lotus icon on the bottom right of the screen, and also please feel free to visit the academyofIndianPhilosophy.com for more information on courses and tutoring. Okay, so Sutra 1.32 states, Tat pratishedhartam eka tattvabhyasah. So, let's break this down here. So first we have tat, then we have pratishedha, tat pratishedha artham eka tattva abhyasah. Oops, we don't need that there. Okay, abhyasah. Okay, so tat pratishedha artham eka tattva abhyasah. Alright, so tat pratishedha artham eka tattva abhyasah. Good. So this is the sutra. Now, let's understand it here. Let's break it down. So artham here in this case is going to mean for the purpose of, right? Artha can mean many things, object, meaning, and purpose. In this case, it's saying for the purpose, or for the intention, or the goal in this particular case. So purpose. So for the purpose of what? Pratishedha. Pratishedha means removal. It can mean negation. It can mean negation. And it also means prevention. Prevention. So for the purpose of the prevention of tat, that. Now that is referring to the previous sutra, which we talked about, the vikshepa, the distractions. So for the purpose of removing the distractions, what do we do? Eka tattva abhyasaha. You have to do practice of. Now the word tattva, it means many things, but we have to get the essence of it. Tattva, it means truth, but it's in this case, it's a material truth of a thing, an object, or an entity. So we're going to say a one-pointed thing. A one-pointed thing. This is a tattva. And eka. So eka is one. So you want to do practice of a thing that is one. So for the purpose of the removal or the negation or the prevention of these distractions, the individual, the yogin, has to practice a truth, a material truth here that is one. Okay? What is this referring to? This is referring to the alambana. The alambana. Alambanam, let's say. Alambanam, remember, it's the support or base on which the mind rests. So if this is the mind and has all these different thoughts, it wants to pick out a thought and stick to it. So then it can, pervade throughout the mind and stick to one-pointedness. So it's saying here that if you want to remove the distractions of the mind, you have to focus on a single thing. Now, at first it may be read as, oh, you have to follow one path, one religion, one thing. It's really not that. Although it does help to follow a path, right? Because then we can say that a path leads to one-pointedness, but that's not what it's saying here. It's not saying that you have to follow a particular religion or a tradition or a sect. It's saying that when you're in meditation, you have to focus on one thing, an alambana. And that alambana really is eka tattva, one reality, one truth. Okay? Why? Because the mind is flooded with tons and tons of thoughts. feelings, emotions, etc. Okay? So now this commentary, the bhashya, this part of this particular sutra, is very detailed in a conversation really between the Buddhists and the yogins, the yoga school of philosophy and Buddhism. So Bauddha dharma, and yoga. Now, when we say conversation, it's really, so it's Vyasa, the commentator Vyasa, discussing the Buddhist point of view of the mind, right? And then the yoga point of view of the mind. And back and forth, the debates that are going on between the two. So we don't need to go into detail for all the debates, but I will touch upon the debates. And these debates are important because they're trying to understand, okay, what is the nature of the mind here? So, see, Buddhism, at the time that the Yoga Sutra was being, formed, what's happening is there are a lot of Buddhists as well. And Buddhists were common opponents to a lot of the Indian philosophers. So Indian philosophers, let's say of the Vedic tradition, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Vedanta, etc., they're debating the Buddhists. Because Buddhists often, they believe in anatman, no self, right? No self. Things are momentary. There is no soul, there is no self, there is no pure consciousness that has a substance, right? Anatman, right? So they believe in no self. But all the other Vedic traditions, they do believe in self. They're like, hold on a second, there is a self. There is a self behind everything that we're experiencing. But Buddhists, the Bauddha Dharma, will say, no, there is no self. And they're very, very brilliant with the way that they try to explain it. Very logical and interesting, just like the other Vedic traditions are as well. It's an interesting point of view. But the Buddhists are a common opponent, a logical debating opponent for the yogins. And so let's look at some of the Buddhist point of view that are explained in this particular sutra. So Vyasa writes that, okay, for those that, let's begin with this. Again, focus the mind on a single entity, right? Because if you focus the mind on a single entity, then you're going to remove the distractions and the distractions that we talked about. So he says, for those that believe that the mind is momentary or temporary, right? And it's just an idea. The mind is just an idea. So just think of this like an idea, a concept, another concept, another concept. They're momentary. There is nothing that combines them. Just one thought, another thought, right? It has no substance behind it. So there's nothing. So if this is just thought, another alternative way of experiencing the mind is like this. Boom. There is a substance that holds the thoughts. Here it's like, nope, there's no substance. It's just empty. Shunyata, empty. Shunyata, emptiness, right? Empty. So here it's like, no, there's substance here. Yoga will say there's substance here. The Bauddha Dharma, Buddhists will say no. Right? So really they're saying here that Vyasa is saying, okay, for those who believe that the mind is momentary, there's no substance, and it's limited to one object at a time. So here there's one object. Oh, okay, you see the table. Here's another object. Oh, I've become aware of something in my past. Oh, here's another object. Oh, I see the sky. So table, past, sky, right? Table, past, sky, etc. On and on. This is just the pattern. There's nothing connecting it, just momentary thoughts, and they're limited to one object at a time. So boom, table. You only have table here. Here, then you have the past, and then you have the sky, right? That's etc. So one thing. Versus here, there is something here that will engage the table, that will engage the past, that will engage the sky. It will engage it at different times and different moments. And then this centralized thing can stay and focus on the past, or it can stay and focus on this. And so here it's saying that for the Buddhists, if you only have momentariness, then everything is always one-pointed. Look, table, that's it. So one-pointed. Ekagra, right? Okay, what about this? Past, that's it. One-pointed. And then sky, one-pointed. Every thought that you have is always going to be one-pointed, right? Versus in yoga and Sankhya, and in any tradition really that has a substance behind it that you can feel, etc., it's not always one-pointed, because it can engage this, it can engage that, it can engage something else. It's not always engaging one thing at a time, because there's one thing while there's other things existing there at the same time. So, it's not like a momentariness. There's actually stuff going on, and the thing is choosing to engage one thing or another thing and being distracted at time. So for yoga, really Vyasa is saying that, okay, for the Buddhists that think that everything is temporary, empty, and without substance, then what's the point of saying that something is one-pointed for you guys? Because everything is always one-pointed. But for yoga, it makes sense, because, one-pointedness can only exist relatively when there's non-one-pointedness or distraction. So for Buddhists, how can there be distraction? So that's one of the arguments, okay? Another argument that's being said is, this is very interesting here too. So let's say this is argument A, argument B. So again, if everything is always momentary, right? Again, so we have the, table, past, and sky, right? Then how does the yoga school says, wait a minute, so how does one thought interact with another thought? How does this thought interact with that thought? Everything is separate from each other, right? There's no thoughts interacting with other thoughts, right? Versus in yoga, where you have these thoughts, but there's a thing that's interacting with each of the thoughts, right? A thought cannot interact with another thought. It just doesn't make sense if they're interconnected, especially if they're different. So table, past, how is this really interacting if everything is momentary and not connected by something, right? Here, there is a connector, which is a thing behind it that connects all of it. But really, this argument becomes important when we talk about karma and samskaras, right? We talked about this. So karma is your storehouse. Remember, like you look at your storehouse and you have all this karma, all this stuff that will determine what comes in the future, what's coming in the present moment, and on for multiple lifetimes. This determines the nature of the mind. This determines what thoughts a person has, and many things like that. So, and then samskaras, the mental impressions that create the karma in an individual, right? The mental impressions will lead you, a habit will make you do something, then you'll go do it, you'll create karma, and then something will come back to you. The whole process, right, of you doing something, of a habit, again, making you do something, going out and coming back, the whole process implies that there has to be a thing that everything is happening to. So over here, everything is separate. How does this karma have its own karma? How does this karma have its own karma? How does this thing have its own samskara? Like, it just doesn't make sense. How do they experience each other? But versus here, in the yoga and Sankhya tradition, and the Vedic traditions, when you have a thing behind everything, it's always, karma and samskaras are always ascribed back to that thing, regardless of what thoughts are happening in there, right? So here it's saying, if everything's separate and momentary, how are we going to explain karma and samskaras, which the Buddhists talk about karma as well. And finally, let's look at the third argument, which is really very, very interesting, the third argument, which I like a lot. And it's really this. Okay, so if the Buddhists say that everything is momentary, right, temporary, and without substance, right, then okay, everything is separate. But Sankhya and Yoga, right, they will say here that where is the thing which so one day you say that I see this, I see X. Next day you say, I hear X or Y, right? And the next day you say, I have touched Z, right? So I see X, I hear X and Y, and I touch Z. I see, hear, touch, so on and so forth. There is an I behind everything. Every one of your senses, sensations, perceptions, there is an I. This I, this aham, in this case they're saying it, the ahankara actually, this I sense, or the sense of self, is experiencing all of this. Your sense of self as whoever you think you are, in my case, Himal, and the sense of self of Himal is going to see, the tree. It's going to hear this particular song. It's going to touch, carpet, etc. It has memories, right? It has memories of these things, and it comes back to an I. Now, whether the I is sort of an illusion or avidya, etc., everyone's individuality, there's still some sort of an I that is connected to these experiences. But in the Buddhist account, there is no I, right? There is really no thing that is connecting all of these thoughts. There is no connector. Now, it's not that the yoga tradition and Sankhya tradition are saying that, the I is a real thing that is the final result. It's not saying that. The I is still an illusion. The sense of self is still an illusion. But in the Buddhists, in this case, if the thoughts and feelings and sensations or the vrittis are not connected by anything, then you are completely negating your sense of self experience, right? You have to negate your sense of self, but you're negating your sense of self experience. So what really is experiencing all this? Individual thoughts. Now, keep in mind that the Buddhists are not responding, right? Because this is the yoga perspective of the opponent. The Buddhists, I'm sure, have very powerful responses. So we have to keep in mind that it's not that one or the other is defeated right now. It's just that in the Yoga Sutra, they're going to give the point of view of the Buddhists in what they think they're saying. So Buddhists don't really have a chance to respond, and they have wonderful responses. So overall, really, this sutra in the commentary is discussing different arguments about the different natures of the mind, right? But really what we're trying to understand in this sutra is saying, look, if you want to eliminate the distractions of the mind that we have discussed, then you have to, in a mind full of so many different thoughts, you have to pick one thing, the alambanam. You have to pick it so that it can, through all of this mess, it just continuously leads to a single flow of thoughts, which lead to samadhi. Okay? And so this is going to eliminate the distractions. Now, we have discussed that the distractions, the vikshepa that come with the obstacles, the antaraya, can also be removed by Om, right? But what is really Om in this case? Om is an alambana. So you're chanting Om all the way through, right? So you're saying Om, Om, Om again and again. And in a mind full of all these thoughts, it's just going to go through and act as the support or base. So chanting of Om is a powerful alambana because it invokes Ishvara, or it is Ishvara, right? So the chanting of Om is the alambana that allows that one-pointedness. It's that single entity in that particular manner. So keep in mind that although we are learning of a new way to remove the distractions, it's still referring to the same way of removing the obstacles. Okay? So in this video, we learned about the different arguments that the Buddhists and the Yogins have for understanding nature of the mind, and really to focus, really to understand that the mind, which is a substance in yoga philosophy, has many different thoughts, but in order to keep it into one-pointedness, it has to focus on a single entity. Okay? So thank you, and until the next video.